very happy to connect the center and the school with the broader project here at Penn of Climate Week, a week dedicated to teach-ins and workshops and lectures and everything possible about the climate crisis. When Annenberg was approached about whether we had someone invested in the topic, there was always only one person, Annenberg doctoral student and member of the Center Steering Committee, Hanna Morris. Hanna's organization and moderation of today's event follows a long line of vigorous investments that she has made around climate change, climate crisis, and climate emergency. With a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Science, Policy, and Management from UC Berkeley, and an MSc from London School of Economics in Media and Communication, focusing on the environment, she is author of multiple academic and popular publications about climate change, co-editor of a book now in progress called Climate Change and Journalism, Negotiating Rifts of Time, and the recipient of no fewer than 12 international honors and awards for her investment in the topic. Now working on a dissertation titled Apocalyptic Authoritarianism in the United States, Power, Media, and Climate Crisis, she is an emblem of how an impassioned engagement with a particular topic can lead to enormously generative and nuanced academic work. I introduce you to Hanna Morris.
Thank you so much, Bari. That was really, really generous, and I really appreciate it so much. And thank you so much, too, for your support in organizing this event today. And so before I introduce Deia, I also want to thank Emily Plowman and Joanna Berkner from the Center for Media at Risk for all of your help in making this event possible. And I want to thank also Dean John Jackson, who connected me with the Climate Week at Penn organizers, of which, like Barbie said, this event is a part of. So to that end, I also want to thank Simon Richter and the other main organizers of the Climate Week at Penn, who have put so much time and work into facilitating what is really an incredible lineup of events that are taking place this week. So I encourage you all, if you haven't already, to check out the Climate Week at Penn website for a full lineup of all the virtual conversations, workshops, and presentations taking place all week. It really is an incredible slate of events. So now let's turn to why we're all here today, though. So it is my pleasure to introduce the speaker for today's event on documentary filmmaking and the climate crisis, Deia Schlosberg. So we are so lucky to have this opportunity to learn from Deia, and I'm so grateful for her time today. Deia is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and producer. She produced Josh Fox's climate change film, How to Let Go of the World and Love All the Things Climate Can't Change, and co-produced Awake, A Dream from Standing Rock, as well as The Reluctant Radical. Deia is also the director of The Story of Plastic, the first feature-length documentary film from the Story of Stuff project, which you can view online this week as part of the virtual Philadelphia Environmental Film Festival. Deia is also currently directing a docuseries called Bootstraps, set to be released in 2021, which chronicles a 2-year basic income trial. Deia also made national news in October 2016 when she was arrested and charged with 45 years worth of felonies for filming the hashtag #ShutDown pipeline protests in North Dakota, an experience which I know many of us concerned with the rights and protection of journalists here at Annenberg and the Center for Media at Risk are very interested in learning more about today. So without further ado, I will mute my mic and turn it over to Deia. But before, I also want to note that there will be a Q&A session in the approximately last 20 minutes of today. So please type up your questions and send them via the chat, either in a private chat to me or in the group chat, and I'll read them aloud and moderate a Q&A again during the last 20 minutes. So thank you so much again, Deia, for being here, and I will mute myself and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hannah. This is really cool to be a part of. So I'll just launch right into it. I am Deia Schlosberg, director and producer of The Story of Plastic, which some of you may have seen as part of the Philadelphia Environmental Film Festival this week. It is, let me share my screen here. Alrighty. The film itself is available at philaenvirofilmfest.org through September 27th. If you haven't seen it yet, I'll try not to give any spoilers, but that's not actually true because I'm going to talk about it a lot. So this talk is about documentary filmmaking and the climate crisis. So no matter what each of us in here does for a living, I'm sure we all feel the urgency of the climate crisis. Though to function at all, we definitely have to do a lot of mental blocking. And on top of that, I'm guessing that a lot of us in this room are feeling like we have to get the most bang for our buck, per se, in terms of using our time to make the most impact we can as far as mitigating the effects of climate change. No doubt that can look totally different for everyone that's working to make the world better. Our individual role depends on our particular skill sets and passions and experiences and whatever else. So here's a little of my backstory and what led me toward documentary film in particular. So I should have made this realization sooner, since I dual degreed in undergrad at Washington University in Earth and Planetary Science and Visual Communications. Looking back, it seems obvious that documentary combines those things pretty damn elegantly. But this was 20 years ago, and the documentary genre wasn't what it is today. For example, Netflix looked like this, and DVDs were just beginning to replace VHS tapes. And the most popular documentaries of the year, according to IMDb, were these. So, despite the medium's history of being used as a tool for social action, they weren't as accessible to watch or make at that point. So after college, I began working as a graphic designer and educator for a United Nations Environmental Program affiliated organization. I took that job believing that print media and the power of imagery would be my best approach to make strides towards sustainability. I found, I mean, this is very recent, but I found imagery like this very compelling, and these sorts of images embedded in themselves in my brain. So that's the kind of work that I was hoping to do. But when I realized that my own formative experiences led me on this path in the first place, to value the health of the living planet above all, I shifted my focus to teaching and outdoor education. And that was wonderful for a while and felt super meaningful, but I was only getting to work with small groups at the time. So that's when I shifted my energies into film, which could combine emotion with science and reach a wider audience, perhaps better than any other medium. So I ended up in a master's program in science and natural history filmmaking at Montana State University in Bozeman, which was a super cool program. And I still work with many of the people that I spent time with in that program. But it was during that time that I became semi-obsessed with disinformation campaigns and exploring who controls the story. It seems there's always an ulterior motive in prevailing narratives. Maybe it isn't the case that history is written by the winners. Maybe it's that they come out ahead because they already wrested control of the narrative. And that idea makes today, and the barrage that is our IV drip of curated information, all the more terrifying. How critical can we be when we're scrolling through an average of 300 feet of phone content per day? That's about as high as the Statue of Liberty, on our phones with our thumbs. I think people understand what drives the news cycle and realize that reporting doesn't happen in an altruistic and ethical vacuum. But what's the alternative right now? That's how the system and funding mechanisms are set up. And it's really hard to cut through that. So that's another place where a documentary kind of sidesteps a lot of established norms. I don't think I'm unique in the documentary field in saying that there's no playbook and that we all feel like we're making it up as we go along, partly out of necessity, having to deal with reality in real time, and partly deliberately so we don't get caught up in the market-based truth of ad-funded media. Not to say that there aren't glorious examples to that somehow stay on the air despite deliberately not pandering to sponsors. So I got a small taste of this dynamic in 2016 when I was filming a pipeline protest in North Dakota. Hannah touched on it in my introduction. The protest was the shutdown of the 5 pipelines that bring tar sands from Canada into the US. It wasn't at Standing Rock, but it was done in solidarity with the water protectors and at the same time. So Amy Goodman and Shailene Woodley had just been arrested at Standing Rock for reporting. And then I was arrested for filming and charged with 45 years worth of felony charges for doing the same. Since then, many other filmmakers and journalists have been arrested just for filming or photographing more and more abuses to human and environmental rights. And I'm focusing on the US here. I know the situation in many other countries is just as bad, often worse, especially in a lot of Central and South American countries. But according to Reporters Without Borders, as of last year, we were classified as problematic here in the US. And that globe looks pretty bad in terms of press freedom right now. So I've been focused on climate and environmental justice based documentaries for about 10 years now. And from what I can gather, it seems like a good use of my time. I've tried to diversify the types of approach I take with my work because, of course, it's nearly impossible to measure impact with documentary films. So if I use somewhat of a shotgun approach to styles, I'm hopeful that for different viewers, at least one of them will hit the mark. There are a lot of studies about effectiveness and how to measure impact, which gives us direction, but the ideal outcome in what is that people's worldviews will be changed for having watched a film. So the effects show up every day for the rest of their lives in large or small ways. So using the story of plastic as a case study. The story of plastic came about because my collaborators and producers, Steve Wilson and Megan Ponder, had been working closely with the Break Free from Plastic movement and recognized how the stories of people working on the front lines, mostly in the global South, were not being told. And because I had been focused on climate change, specifically fossil fuel and petrochemical infrastructure, environmental justice, and dispelling misinformation campaigns, I knew that by uniting all of our threads and working closely with movement leaders around the world, we could tell a more comprehensive story of the issue that had been told before. For me, it was super important to tell a new side of it. There had been a lot of plastic films at the point when Steve contacted me about this project, and they had done a good job of representing the waste side of it. If you ignore the story of plastic images in that Google search, that's kind of what the span of plastic documentary search turned up. All about the oceans, all about waste. And I knew that was just the tip of the iceberg. There were narratives about plastic waste and the use of natural gas that no one was telling. No one was telling the front end, the production side of the story, the connection to fossil fuels. And that's where I wanted to focus. That's where I saw the gap in information. But as we began structuring the film, it turned more and more to the story of plastic that we'd been told. These constructed realities that were becoming more and more clear as we dove into all of the archival material. So I wanted to represent that process of discovery, but I didn't want to make it filmmaker centered, since that can turn people off or question their motivations in making a film, even if completely genuine. So when I found Zoe Carpenter's article and her parallel process in writing the article, I was super excited and immediately wrote her an email that I felt a little unhinged writing, because I knew that narratively this was exactly the angle we needed to take. But it worked out because she was happy to participate and she worked amazingly well as a filmmaker surrogate. She ended up being the perfect guide. So my main goals for the film were, first of all, to dispel the myths. So There's the big myth that the biggest problem with plastics is pollution and ocean plastics, and along with that, that those ocean plastics are Asia's fault. So those are all indeed myths. And secondly, the myth that recycling is effective and that plastic pollution is our fault as consumers. But above all, as I sought to dispel those myths, we really wanted to make sure that the stories and the voices we were sharing were authentic. So we wanted to put environmental justice at the forefront, i.e. not the stories of the filmmaking team. And that's where our Breakthrough from Plastic Network access was invaluable. We knew we wanted to cover certain big topics in the plastic story. So we went to the movement partners working on those specific issues to say, where's the best place to go to show examples of this? Who else should we interview about this? Plus, of course, the usual investigative documentary approach of being open while on location. Talking to people, learning new information, following new leads, and trying to let go of preconceptions of the story we were supposed to tell, and instead telling the story that actually presented itself. So it was challenging at every step, but assembling all of the amazing material that we were collecting into a compelling narrative, and not just a research paper, was probably the hardest part of making this film. This is how it started out. This is the journey that I wanted to take the viewer on. I eventually cleaned it up a little, but this is how I understood the story and understood the problem and connected the dots in my head. So turning this into a film was going to be a challenge. And I had to work to get the presenting organization, the Story of Stuff, to jump on board the idea of making it a feature. They wanted to break it up into little vignettes, but the most important part of the story for me was the interconnection between all these things. And you can't get at that if you only tell little vignettes at a time. So me and my crew and co-creators pushed pretty hard to say, no, this has to play out in time. People have to be given the space to make these connections. So the other main challenge with this film, and with any documentary really, is how do you make nuance exciting? We're in this new attention economy / media ecosystem competing with perceived absolutes. So what made the story so compelling for me to want to work with was there was a mystery to solve. Who is doing this? Who is causing this problem? And the outrage that it provoked. Not traditional outrage at a particular target, though that did kind of end up being the case, but the outrage of learning that I was duped, and not just once, but over and over for years. I think outrage is a fairly universal reaction to being lied to. I remember very clearly the first time I learned that industry intentionally and secretly polluted our communities. When I learned about Love Canal, and that feeling stuck with me. It sent me on a path to uncover and expose those injustices. And sadly, the more I've learned, the more I've realized that those are not exceptions to the rules. They are the basis for the rules. The rules are made with loopholes built in. They're made with regulations that are impossible to monitor. And the modest fees for breaking such rules are built into the operating budgets of the companies that wrote them in the first place, usually via ALEC. For lessons to really sink in, they need time. Lessons are learned when we synthesize information, not just consume it. And that's essentially what a documentary can do, because its most important component is time and how to use that time. I can walk a viewer through a synthesis, dole out information in pieces, strategically placed, so that later, when you need that little bit of information from earlier, it's waiting there in your mind for you to put into place and connect. Oops. And that's what makes it effective. Because it gives the viewer ownership. It's very much their own mental, emotional journey. The filmmakers just lay out the breadcrumbs. So I want to go back to the myths. So as I said earlier, the main myths that we wanted to dispel with the story of plastic had to do with waste being the primary problem, because that's what people were familiar with. People have seen the images of aquatic animals struggling with plastic bits, and although that certainly pulls at the heartstrings, the myth, sorry, I'm getting distracted, that the problem itself is the front end and the creation of plastics in the first place. Plastic itself is not a result of people demanding that their materials get packaged in single-use plastics, but in the companies having an excess of this material and wanting to put a price on it and creating these markets, creating artificial demand in a lot of emerging markets in Africa and Southeast Asia. So it's not that people are asking for these things. It's that they're being pushed upon them, forced into the markets. And on top of that, we as the global North exports our waste materials as part of the global waste trade to a lot of Southeast Asian companies. So as we were in a lot of these places, especially in East Java is where it really sticks out in my head. And you can see in the picture there in the lower left, those are houses in East Java surrounded by scrap plastic that was imported from North America and Europe. So as we were going through these villages, we were seeing wrappers and packaging from things like Bob's Red Mill, which is made in Oregon, largely used in the US. Not to spotlight or not to call out Bob's, it's all packaging that clearly was not made and consumed in East Java. So on top of so many people in the world not asking for these products, they're getting the end result of these products, and the companies aren't having to pay for those externalities. They're not having to pay the municipal fees in a lot of these communities for collection, for cleanup. You can see in the lower right there that that's a cleanup effort in Manila Bay in the Philippines after a storm surge that washes all the plastic waste from nearby river systems into the bay. And those are municipal workers that are paid by local taxes when all of that material has been profited from by this industry, and they're not paying for the disposal or collection of it. But then on the front side, you have places like the image above that in Houston, where the Houston shipping channel is where there's a huge amount of global petrochemical processing plants. And the people that live along those communities, the fence lines of those communities, preceded the development of that industry. So they're the ones that are paying medical bills for their kids with leukemia. And it's another place where industry has externalized the costs. So if this whole industry was forced to pay for the actual cost of the product that they're making, it would not be economically viable. But because it's subsidized, that's the situation that we are left with. So as we were filming the story of plastic, there was a big change in the global waste trade, because China passed regulation that closed its borders to scrap materials imports. And this was one of those pivots that I mentioned. We were planning to track the waste through China and through the kind of informal sector that occurred there. But with the passing of that regulation, we got to see the impact of laws on, I got super nervous all of a sudden. We got to see the impact of regulations on global outfall. So that's what caused the plastic that had been going to China to end up in all of these other unregulated areas. And it also caused a lot of the waste to end up being incinerated. And we visited incineration facilities in India, and again, saw the fallout of people having to deal with the health impacts. So what I'm getting at here is how important legislation is, and how important it is to vote. So before we get to the Q&A, I just want to put in a note for how important it is, and especially in Pennsylvania, for people to make a voting plan. I truly believe that this is the most important election in the history of the planet. So please do everything you can to get out there. I want to thank Annenberg and the Center for Social Media at Risk for having me as part of Climate Week this year, and especially to Hanna for inviting me and making this happen. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. I know I jumped around a bit, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Deia. So if you stop sharing screen, then there are a few questions. So I can, thank you, all right, cool. So I actually am gonna take the opportunity to ask the first question. I'll take that, right. And so I am wondering, so you have been working with environmental films and climate filmmaking for 10 years now. And a lot has changed in those 10 years in terms of the stories told about climate change and about, like you mentioned, really starting to think about the systems that are behind the impacts that we're seeing today. So I'm wondering, in those 10 years that you've been working, if you've noted any sort of shifts in the discourse around climate change and narratives are being told, and what your observations are in terms of potential transformations happening today in terms of the way that climate change is discussed.
I mean, I feel like I've definitely noticed a shift toward more information and more access. It's just also more difficult to sift through. There's certainly, I mean, it's certainly become way more politicized over those 10 years and way more polarized over those 10 years. I just watched The Social Dilemma and found it incredibly disturbing. If you haven't watched it yet, it's on Netflix. I'm not like intentionally plugging Netflix here. I've mentioned them a few times, but just because they're the kind of the symbol of streaming media now. But yeah, my friend Jeff Orlowski made that film last year, and it is pretty terrifying how our behavior is so dictated by algorithms that are written according to ad revenue. So I almost feel like I can only answer that question for me, because I'm the only person in the world that sees the feed that I see, because all of our information is so tailored to each of us. So in my feed, the way that I curate it, I get a ton of information and papers and articles about climate every day. And I feel like there's been a huge uptick in reporting and in nuance. And I often feel hopeful about the state of environmental reporting and reporting on climate change specifically. But I also know that most people, I don't know about most people. I would assume, based on people's actions, that most people are not getting that in their feed. It's not what's on mainstream for the most part, on broadcast media and news. So I don't know. I think in short, I'm happy that it's out there. I'm happy that the work is being done. I'm really encouraged by that. I'm super encouraged by the work you're doing and the work that the Center for Media at Risk is doing, and organizations like Journalists Without Borders. But I think it's increasingly hard to find. So it's a mixed bag.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. It's difficult to know exactly what is communicated to what groups of people. It's definitely very, very challenging to know. So we have a question from Barbie. So thank you, Deia, for a very informative talk and for your important call to vote. You mentioned early on that in order to function in and around climate crisis, one needs to do a lot of mental blocking. Is there a visual mechanism with documentary that is best equipped to break through that blocking without causing trauma in viewers?
Oh man, that's a good one. And it's so hard. I don't know that there's an answer. I think, I mean, everybody's tolerances are so different. I tend to lean into the truth of things. I mean, I don't really think it's fair for people to be able to tune out media about a topic that people who are living through that issue can't tune out. There are children living through these catastrophes that don't have the option of not paying attention to it or getting overwhelmed by it. They live with it every day and have to function with it every day. And that's extremely unfair. So I tend not to worry about protecting viewers. On the other hand, I know that burnout is real. I know that depression amongst climate scientists is a huge issue. Scientists and reporters and communicators. I mean, we're in the midst of a massive human existential crisis. So I don't necessarily think it's the responsibility of the creators of the information and the communicators of the information to protect the consumers of that information. I think people need to find their own balances of what they can tolerate and still be effective, and develop coping mechanisms and ways to check out and regroup and stay refreshed and energized without just checking out. So yeah, I'm a proponent of getting the information out there and trusting that people will do with it what they need to. Maybe that's too hopeful, but
we have some questions in private chat, and one kind of follows up on this, but asking more personally about you and how you cope with emotions that arise. This is from Juliana7, and she has a question asking this, or how do you cope with the emotions that arise when working on a project like The Story of Plastic?
Story of Plastic was definitely a massive emotional roller coaster, where there were several points throughout the making of it that I felt like there's no point. Why am I even bothering? This is so overwhelming. But then invariably, I'd work a little more closely with people in the Break Free from Plastic movement who were actually making a change, who were actually moving the needle with their work, and seeing that over and over and over and over again all over the world, and seeing how those things came together and were additive gave me hope and kept me wanting to do the work and highlight their work to try to amplify it. And I think maybe the most significant response to the film that I got was from a woman, Tiza, who is in Jakarta. And if you've seen the film, or if you're going to see the film, she's the one that we're on the boat with on the Ciliwung River, looking at the layers and layers and layers of plastic on the banks. But she was able to come to the premiere, and she came up to me after the film, and she hadn't seen the final version yet, and said that it really affected her because she had no idea how her work fit in with the work of other organizers and activists. And she felt that burnout frequently, and seeing how her work wasn't in isolation, that it combined with the work of all these other people, she said gave her more strength to keep doing it. So I think, yeah, it's just so important to remind ourselves that we're not doing this alone. We're not one person. And that's probably the most frequently asked question after a screening is, what can I do as one person? And that's the answer is, you, as one person, there's like, you're not going to change the course of things, but as one person, you could be part of a group that will change the course of things. And a group is made up of individuals. So it was just that over and over. It's needing to remember that you're part of a network that really cares and that's really doing good work.
So we have another question on the private chat from Richard Stupart, who's postdoc at Center for Media at Risk. And he asks, What are the challenges to documenting a system that spans so many locations, nations, and legal/social universes, and with perpetrators who are often really powerful and presumably hard to access?
Well, I didn't hear the last part of it.
And with perpetrators who are often really powerful and presumably hard to access.
Yeah. As far as the network, I mean, I briefly touched on this in the presentation, but that we have the advantage of working in time with film. So it's okay to not expressly make a lot of the connections if you strategically place the pieces so that people can kind of come around to the same conclusion from different points. I always think of being in a new city and wandering through streets and coming upon a landmark from a different direction. And at that moment, realizing, that's how this connects. That like cements the full map of a place in my head. And I kind of think of documentary and connecting dots in the same way. Like if you can come to a conclusion through a different route, then like in the diagram, then you can more fully understand a problem and understand the nuance and the three-dimensionality of the problem. Yeah, and that's what time I think is equivalent to in documentary. And as far as dealing with perpetrators who are secretive and hard to get at, I was actually super shocked, and this is one of the other questions I get a lot, is what surprised you the most in making the film? And I was shocked by how easy it was to find. The CEOs and spokespeople for a lot of these companies speaking very openly about their plans and about development and massive infrastructure projects and their impacts as being purely positive. And what was interesting is that, like, I would hear about a massive new project on the Gulf Coast that was like given code words because they didn't want to alarm the surrounding communities. So I thought digging into something like that was going to be difficult to find. But then at their like funders meetings or different industry conferences, they would talk about it totally openly, but twisted. So the lens would be different, and they would kind of reframe the narrative of what that project was, and it's what I see. I mean, it's what I see Trump doing daily, like not hiding from things, but just flat out calling them something else. So that was really surprising to me, that it was so easy to, and I found myself wondering constantly, like, these are intelligent people. Like how do they understand what they're doing? How do they sleep at night? And the answer to that I came to without talking to any of them directly was, they really do make themselves believe the lines that they write. because I mean, I don't know how else a human could keep doing those things. They have to buy into the lines that they're creating.
Yeah, a lot to think about there for sure. So I'm going to go through, there's a lot of questions. So I'm just going to go in order. And this question continues upon what you're talking about a little bit. And it's from David Stally. And he asks, the network diagram of the story you want to tell and the connections you want to reinforce was really striking to me. In a very different line of psychological research, we try to understand how people learn that there's a broader organization underlying what has to be a linear sequence of messages. I'd love to hear more about the process you take in designing the linear sequence of your films to help viewers make the connections you want them to make. You mentioned leaving space for them to form connections, for example, but I'm curious about other approaches you may take.
I'm gonna put the diagram up again. So this was a pretty early version of it. I didn't keep updating the diagram as we went through the process, so the final version would end up looking pretty differently than this. Some of these stories we didn't even end up using as examples, and then there are a lot more that didn't end up in here. I mean, that was the nut. That was the thing to crack. Like, how do you make this linear? And a part of that was working with Ruben de Luna, the illustrator and animator, who's done all the work for the Story of Stuff for years, and giving people a visual reference or a visual map that they could so the illustration that we use in the film is kind of the mechanical process from extraction to disposal of the plastic system. So as we went through different stories and different aspects of the process, people had that mental image that they could relate back to. So we didn't have to tell the story of plastic in that order, as long as people could reference that literal diagram, that literal sequence in their minds, so that we could kind of have our timeline, our linear progression was through the understanding of the topic based on the information that was already out there and what people thought they knew and then realized they didn't know. So it was really a lot of kind of psychology and analyzing the process of learning about an issue and researching how that information had been communicated historically. So we had the timeline, we had the process, and then we had the internal timeline of discovery, which kind of interwove those other two. So that's not, it's kind of a complicated answer. But yeah, it was super, super tricky, and just having all these pieces it wouldn't have made a very good film. So there was a lot of, it was all in the weaving, and I worked with two amazing editors to really figure that out. The spreadsheets for this film are insane.
So I have a couple more questions. How much time do we have left? There's about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna take Emily's advice and try to combine them. So it'll be a little bit of a longer question, and you can sort of just answer um, as you can. But I'm gonna try and combine Gina and Megan. So Gina is asking about backlash that you potentially received, especially in terms of the wake of your arrest, and if how you navigated this, how you navigated, first of all, experience of being arrested, potential intimidation or backlash from your documentary films, and how this shapes the work and efforts of documentarians so that you've worked with or yourself personally. I think that's a really, really important question, but I'll also tack on too, in case you want to add on additional answer to Megan's question, where she's asking about, have you found groups like the Peace Corps are providing scientifically sound and clearly focused information? Is there too much focus on individual choices in these organizations' educational and activist goals, or are they oriented towards the systemic problems of global industry and capitalism? So I guess first question, intimidation, backlash. Second question, more of a larger question of how to deal with the individual and systemic sort of nature.
Yeah, those are both excellent. So backlash, after the arrest, yeah, I got a lot of hate mail. I got some really nasty comments. I was pretty shaken up for a while. But once that subsided a little bit, it I think cemented my desire to get that information out. Like, there's a reason that I was jailed. Like, they clearly don't want that stuff covered, so that tells me how important it is to cover it. So it totally backfired. I haven't actually gotten a lot of pushback from this film, surprisingly. A little bit of trolling, but not really, nothing super antagonistic. I thought there'd be a lot more fallout by now. And I'm not sure why that is. I mean, we definitely let everybody speak for themselves in it, on both sides of things. And maybe that's part of it. But I'm not really sure. It seems pretty damning to me. And then on the individual versus collective action, I completely agree that there is way too much focus on what you can do, and that is a line out of the industry playbook. Like, if you're feeling guilty about not doing enough, if you're worried about where one piece of plastic that you had no choice in buying for whatever reason it ends up, and you let that guilt keep you from looking up at the bigger system, then they've won. People don't take action and unite when they feel guilty. They take action and unite when they feel outrage over injustice. And the more they can keep us looking down and feeling bad about buying something that doesn't have a triangle symbol on it, the longer they can maintain power. And the more types of plastic they can put that symbol on, even if it's not true that it's recyclable, the better people will feel about consuming it. And the more they talk about humans, as consumers versus citizens, the more we see ourselves that way. So yeah, we are not consumers, we are people, and we are not individual people. We are a collective if we choose to be that.
I think that's like an amazing last sentence to close this on. So thank you for that. That really, you gave so much to think about, and really appreciate the work you're doing so much. It's really, really important and really needed. So thank you. And just thank you for your time today, and hope to watch your new documentary films as they come out. So thank you again, Deia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to everyone who attended. Once again, just a plug for Climate Week happening this week to check out the events, and also the Philadelphia Mental Film Festival. There's a lot going on this week to sort of expand this conversation about climate change and how to communicate about climate change and the environment. So thank you again, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your Climate Week. Thank you.